One of the last Irish famine ships was the Jeanie Johnson. She came in 1853, which was very near the end of the famine. We heard it was coming to New Brunswick. We made a big push that it should come here, and it came here first. Took us 5 years to get her here. A whole bunch of St Andrews people. We really wanted her to come. This was a shipbuilding place. We built ships like that here. It was perfect for St Andrews with its history.
Sheila Washburn, tell me a little bit about the Jeanie Johnson and why you got involved.
Well, the Jeanie Johnson came to St Andrews in 1853. And the original ship in 1997, I had a phone call from a man that works at the Provincial Archives, Dennis Noel. And he said that Janet Toole had told him that I might be the one to approach to organize getting a tall ship to come to St Andrews. Apparently it was already coming to the Miramichi and to St John when it was built. But he found that the Jeanie Johnson, the only port that she had visited was in New Brunswick, was St Andrews, and that she should come here. So with his support, I started to get together a bunch of people who were just as excited as I, to invite her, first of all, to find the money to assist her, and then to find the people to actually greet her when she came. So Janet Toole was the person who told Dennis about me. We grew up together in St Andrews, and her ancestor, Dr. McStay, treated the immigrant Irish when they were quarantined in St Andrews. So we formed a committee, and I made arrangements for her to arrive, hopefully in 2000. The committee in Ireland that was building her ran into difficulties, and she wasn't ready to sail in 2000. So although our committee had been formed and we raised money and we'd sent it to Ireland, we had no ship to show for our work, but we put our money in the bank and waited. And eventually they got their act together in Ireland. They hired a new person to be in charge of the group, or he volunteered, dentist and trolley by the name of Dennis Reen. And the ship sailed in 2003, which is exactly 150 years since they had landed 200 people in St Andrews. Well, the original trip was very exciting because they ran into a storm and that put her off course, and she limped into St Andrews with some probably very seasick people on board. It was a wonderful ship, though, because of all the what they call the coffin ships that brought Irish immigrants to these shores. They didn't lose a soul at sea. This ship that was originally built in Quebec, they all got here and they all arrived in St Andrews safely.
Put on Hospital Island, I suppose.
They wouldn't, no doubt, if there was anybody on board that had any illness, they would have been quarantined on Hospital Island. The reason the cross is here is because out there's a little wee island without a blessed tree on it. When the ships arrived, they deposited their sick in a little hospital on the island, in the hopes that they would survive whatever diseases they had. Many didn't, and they are buried there. This cross is erected in memory of them. One of the last Irish famine ships was the Jeanie Johnson. She came in 1853, which was very near the end of the famine. They were really crowded, and the people on board of her, many of them stayed to work on the railroad. The people who erected this cross were the Irish Canadian Cultural Association, formed by a group of people. One of them was my father, Earl Cahy, and two others were Joan Jones and Anne Brough. Now, Joan came from the Miramichi, and her father was a fiddler. And so Joan insisted that instead of having a harp on it, the cross must have a fiddle on its plinth. as well as the ship and, of course, a shamrock. They never played harps, they played fiddles. So when we heard it was coming to New Brunswick, we made a big push that it should come here, and it came here first. It took us 5 years to get her here. A whole bunch of St Andrews people, Chuck Shum, Max Wolfe, Gary Scott from St Stephen, B.B. Chamberlain, Vaughn McIntyre, Fay McMullen, Mary Casement, as mentioned, Anne and Anne Joan, and Carol Barton and myself. Carol Barton was the treasurer. And we had raised enough money to get her here we sent money to Ireland for the building of the ship, and they couldn't get her finished for 2000. And when we found out she was really going to come, we only had 10 weeks to prepare. When the ship actually arrived, the Jeanie Johnson, instead of coming through Head Harbor Passage, she came through Letite Passage, which runs probably north of Pendleton Island, right from the Letite Point. So that's a very perilous passage. It's not safe for ships of that size because the currents are so strong and the rocks are so close to the surface. And by the time they arrived, the captain was quite shook up. That size of ship never came through the Letite Passage when St Andrews was a port full of sailing vessels. No ship of that size with that deep a keel would ever come through that channel. The captain was in total shock. He had stood on his very valuable bark and watched the rocks in the Letite Passage just miss the ship. He said, if I had known we had to come through that, I would never have brought the bark to St Andrews. And he blamed it on us, of course, and we had tried to take his hired American to show him what the ship was up against. He was freaked out. Oh, was he mad? He was. The other person who was very much involved in St Andrews in the history of the Jeanie Johnson was Dorothy Gaynor. Still lives in St Andrews, and her ancestors were the Gaynors that came on board that ship. There was a father and 2 sons, and when the other immigrant Irish from that ship moved inland, Mr. Gaynor stayed in St Andrews. He had hurt himself on building the railroad and was lame, and he stayed on in town. And at that point, the railroad was being built. Kennedy of Kennedy Hotel moved to St Andrews at that time and provided ties for the railroad. He came from Ontario. A lot of things were happening in town, and isn't that marvelous to see the whole yacht club? The yacht club worked very hard. It was one of the strongest volunteers.
Everybody was out there.
Everybody assisted for the whole weekend. I mean, it was a 4-day, well, it turned out to be a 3-day event. We had it all set up with people on stage and pipers, and we had a piper to march the crew up the wharf, and fiddlers at the end of the wharf playing. Vaughn McIntyre had the great idea of getting everybody who had a house that was built and is in existence at the time the original Jeanie Johnson came, to put a ribbon on their house. And so all the homeowners in town had green ribbons on their houses. Each project that was taken by somebody who suggested it, they made it happen. The sailing vessel Corrie, with all her sails up for once. Perfectly beautiful day. It's too bad that we didn't have the beautiful ramp that we have now, because what we had was that people had to go up and down those stairs. And he cut it off so that it was only at the high tide we could get people on board. He was quite surprised by the tides. Good heavens. It was the nicest committee I've ever worked on, because it was we had such short time, first of all. We only had 10 weeks. And everybody who was on the committee had ideas. And everyone who said, why don't we do this, then said, and I'll do it. There was nobody on there that was dead weight or telling people what to do. It was, this is what we should do, and I'll see that it gets done. It was marvelous.
They even had a hovercraft, the old and the new. That was around town for a little bit, but I haven't seen it for a while.
The man from St. Stephen, Gary Scott, actually came from Elmont, Ontario, but he was in St. He said, I'll look after the ceilidh, and he found groups to perform continuously. And he himself, during the daytimes, offered Irish country dancing. So he gave lessons. When the ship was docked, of course, there was a great ceremony of welcoming her. And I should mention two actors who were much involved with that. Robbie O'Neill and Michelle Daigle. Michelle Daigle was running a program here with the Arts Council of young children who were performing Whale of a Tale theatre. And on stage with Michelle at that time was this little theatre company, and three of my grandchildren were in that theatre company at that time. Emily, Jessica, and Cameron Blair. In fact, Robbie O'Neill's children were in that program as well. Just one more thing about Robbie O'Neill was that because the ship was supposed to come in the year 2000, the year centennial, we raised a lot of money to get her here and to pay for her building, actually. I think we sent $3,000 or $4,000 out to Ireland to help build it. And Robbie was very instrumental in that fundraising. He put on a play in the Catholic Church Hall. It was very well attended, and we raised a lot of money that night because of his play. The ship herself, or the bark, was beautifully set up with, as you know, because you went through it, no doubt, with the bunks and the area they set aside that showed exactly what it would look like when she was a sailing ship without any power and brought the immigrants to St Andrews. And this is on board the ship, showing what it looked like.
Mm-hmm. It was very crowded when we were on. But...
Oh, it was very crowded when they were on. The immigrants. 200 came on that tiny ship. Inadequate clothing, not prepared for Canadian weather.
It must have been tough.
It was very tough. If you go up through the country and along Lawrence Station, that section probably was where they were working. And then the railroad went bankrupt. It got beyond Macadam eventually, and got as far as Canterbury, but it didn't make it quite to Woodstock. And we dreamed up every way we could to raise funds. And one of them was that Jeanie Johnson was prepared to let people sail on her from St Andrews to St John. But only a few, and they were going to have to work. And they were going to have to be pretty agile if they were going to actually help sail the ship. And we could not get permission. There's some kind of regulation where if you're going to take a cruise ship, you have to have proper inspection, license and all of that. And the Coast Guard wouldn't permit that. So this was very disappointing for me because he just would not leave the ship. He stayed on board and he sent his first mate to be greeted at the town hall. And he left early. He actually took the boat out a day, at the ship. He left a day early. And we had a whole bunch of young people that were, the Kiwanis Club had paid for them to go through on that last day. He gave out free passes to kids, and maybe 100 went through, but whether they were the same 100 that were going to be there that day, Then they went and charged us for it being here anyway, and we were able to get our money back from the government and repay the Jeanie Johnson. It was a charge to have it actually pass through these waters. And so this is her leaving.
This is her leaving.
And
so it was a major achievement getting it here, wasn't it? You did a good job.
well, we were paid. We really wanted her to come. I mean, it was so perfect. I mean, this was a shipbuilding place. We built ships like that here, and in St. Stephen and along the coast and across the border in Robinson. It was perfect for St. Andrews with its history.